First and foremost, it's so great to have everyone here connected digitally in this great new world we're living in. So we're here talking about leadership and culture in crisis. I will start by giving some context on myself, just so as you know where I'm coming from, and then be able to dive into it further. So I joined the Next Level team 6 months ago, attracted to it, obviously knew Tim for the last, I don't know, back to my Adfa days, and saw what they're doing, and particularly for someone like me who felt that I had a lot of experience and a lot to offer. My love language is ultimately acts of service, so my ability to get that information out to help people was my true drawing, and I saw the sort of frameworks and processes and just all the conversations I was having with them were enabling me to draw this out. Fast forward 6 months, I've then been able to work with the team to help to establish the frameworks that help me to articulate the experience and knowledge I have and translate it into relevance for those who are then able to take it away and use it as value, either personally or professionally, individually or collectively. So my background to date, grew up in Brisbane, now live in Sydney, and I joined the Defence Force going through the Defence Force Academy, 3 years in Canberra, and then another year at the Royal Military College before becoming an infantry officer living up in Townsville, deploying to West Timor. And then 2010, I entered into the Australian Special Forces down here in Sydney, specifically the Commando Regiment within Special Operations Command. I've had 4 tours to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq. I lived overseas on exchange to the US Special Forces for a year in 2015. I spent a lot of my time, 2013, 2014, bopping around the Asia Pacific region, where my role was to work with and test the business continuity plans and emergency response plans of Australian embassies and consulates around the Asia Pacific, and also work with local nations to help build and develop their capacities. The last 2 years of my military career, I was then the officer in charge of the Australian Special Forces Selection Course. And that was during a time whereby our requirement was to start to transition our selection processes and mechanisms from selecting essentially a selection based on physical attributes and warfighting attributes in Afghanistan, and start to transition to select people who could achieve those performance requirements, but then also have more of a focus on the emotional intelligence to do more of the requirements and jobs that I sort of did, engaging with other government, foreign nationals, key agencies within Australia and internationally, and those people who could then perform and operate out of their uniform without relying on any form of authority or essentially entitlement, and transitioning to responsibility and competence and character to achieve their cut through. I actually transitioned from defence 2018 myself, then partnered with a company called Fitness and Lifestyle Group and Quadrant Private Equity to bring Barry's Boot Camp here to Sydney and Singapore. And I now work for the veterans mental health charity called Swiss 8. So I can bring with me a lot of experience in transition and change. I know a lot of people on this panel today, on this call today, have great experience in change management. And I'm also get to talk about that change management at the personal level. And everything that I talk to these days comes down to individual and collective culture. My military career has, and personal career to date, has always brought me back to the greatest assets we have are our people. And the more time and investment we place in individual culture and then collective culture, we then reap the rewards tenfold. And going back to the 1 to 6 model that Tim just spoke about, 1 at the bottom, focusing on you individually, then sets the bedrock for everything else to the top. I think Lisa brought something out beautiful before, talking about, the vision needs to be identified by the leader, then ultimately it has to be owned by you. When we talk about culture, when we talk about mission, when we talk about vision and purpose and values, I definitely bring with me the experience whereby you could be so aligned on yourself personally, but if you haven't then brought your team together along with that culture, along with that vision, along with that purpose, and in my role to ask people to go step outside the wire to conduct a mission that was life-threatening to themselves and others around them, then you can't rely on authority yourself, and all the time that you may not have spent in culture beforehand is going to come back to bite you in the ass. So that's me. Also talking about culture, and particularly at the moment in the context where we're in, I am quite the learned expert personally, and then working with others professionally on just the true impacts of culture at the highest ends of their capabilities, the ability to motivate, influence, and essentially lead people on combat operations in life and death scenarios, through to those whereby people have lost their purpose, lost their way. And the context I provide for that is, I unfortunately only lost one of my soldiers on combat operations, but since then, and since leaving the culture that we lived and worked in, have had nearly 10 times that take their own lives due to their loss of culture, the loss of their purpose, and committing suicide along the way. And that's a lot of the cause I now work with within Swiss 8. And how this relates to culture itself, again, there's so much to cover here, and I want to say up front that the whole purpose of this webinar is to simply provide introductions to Next Level, introductions to ourselves. The key thing to demonstrate here is that we are a team that has been brought together and have our own specialties, and I definitely don't try to profess anything other than my own personal experience and my ability to now translate that and make that relatable and potentially aspirational for those of you who are watching this, and then working together with the team. And I want to go through a number of topics based on essentially my lived experience, and then my professional understanding, learning and development and refinement of those to products or to assets that may help you, and then provide you with the opportunity at the end of this to follow up if there's any individual points that I've touched on. I'm only going to touch on them at a very superficial level, so then please reach out and follow up, and I can definitely work with you guys one-on-one, work with Ross and the team to then tailor something to you. Cool. Bit more about myself. My love language is acts of service. Might sound weird to have a special forces guy stand up here and talk about his love language, but I tell you what, particularly the 9 years of my career in special forces, I had to spend most of my time out of uniform, and my job was to influence and motivate others to do essentially what was needed, no matter how hard or how tough or how much they didn't want to. I have to saying that the test of true culture is if people still value when it's not having fun. And we're currently in the climate and circumstances where not a lot of people are having fun. And most of us are finally having the chance to reassess, reevaluate, or review our own personal culture. And I'm sure, as many of you are like me, have had the opportunity to look professionally, either within the organization we're working in, or within the organizations that we are associating with or seeing out and about to our left and to our right, and just how they have responded at a cultural level to this crisis, how they have potentially had to lay off their workforce, how they have fought to retain their workforce, how they have demonstrated effective leadership and not just efficiencies, because at this time here and now, it is the effective leadership and management of people that is the true competitive advantage in a business, whereby things like capital, things like network, things like personal motivations have really taken a huge hit. And all the work that organizations have done in what we call pre-hag shower in the lead up to this crisis is exactly what they're reaping in rewards here and now. And those who have been had the privileged position to sit back and simply be the best at their game, to rely on capital, to rely on many extrinsic motivators such as money or such as promise and position, have really taken a big hit, as individuals have had to revert back to their intrinsic motivations as they resorted back to their survival mechanisms to cope and get them through this, and then still provide force multipliers to the skills and achieving the systems and results that their teams require to perform and function and then achieve their headway in the market space. Previously, it was very interesting in reaching out to a number of others, inviting them to this, and some of the comments I got were, yes, I've been a director of people and culture for the last 10 years. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm doing. I've managed to perform at the highest ends of requiring people to literally put their lives on the line for a mission that I, as a leader, brief them in on and have them trust in me. And I'm still relearning ways to be better as a leader and better ways to lead and motivate people on a daily basis. I've definitely been able to do that at the bookend of the highest level of performance. And to be honest, now at the moment, I'm able to do it at the other bookend, where people are at their lowest levels of performance, where people have left that high end. And I'll quickly talk about that. When I was in the military, again, I was required to perform and lead men and women on missions that were to kill and capture people, that were to put their own lives on the line, And never once did I ever have any personal mental health issues, or never once, apart from a couple of PTSD issues, did I have soldiers, sailors, or men and women under my command have issues. Yet since leaving that culture, since leaving that system, we have had so many present issues with mental health, particularly anxiety and depression. And Tim talked about those beforehand. In your A to B, anxiety, B, so much challenges, so much opportunity, so much skill set and potential, not knowing how to structure that, through to depression, whereby you have pretty much bored. You don't know what to do, all this potential, but nowhere to put it. And again, we just lost so many more people than we did at the highest extremes of physical danger, whereas people are taking their own lives, at home in the lowest level of external dangers. And really just unpacking that for me has been so huge to learn and understand that. And then drawing that back to the relevance of how we can then work with those of you who ultimately have the incredible responsibility to then work with, train, manage, and develop people. And what I've rapidly learned is just that difference in processes between the military system and the corporate system, in that as an officer in the military, my role was to command, lead, and manage everyone under my responsibility, everyone who sat under me, under the organizational chart. And in the military environment, every year I was taken out of my professional trait and taken away to do specific leadership and management training in order for me to progress in my position. Bring that out to the corporate world, and what one of the rapid observations I've made is that so many people in those leadership and management roles are there most of the time due to their time in rank, what we say, their time in their position or their professional skill sets. And working with Tim and Ross, we worked with some really outstanding organizations, particularly top-end legal, top-end finance, top-end consulting. Whether you're a partner in a legal firm, 9 times out of 10, so many of them haven't been taken away and actually invested in personally, in their ability to actually understand leadership first and foremost, let alone develop their own leadership style and manage their people with emotional intelligence, as opposed to just focusing on performance outcomes. And that is by no fault of their own. That is just simply the requirement of what has been the world before this, to focus on efficient and efficiencies, ways through which you can do the right things to get the fastest way from A to B in order to achieve your KPI outcomes, in order to achieve your revenue outcomes, your profit outcomes, in order to make sure you're in the black and going up and up. What happens 9 times out of 10 is that then the problems that start to then enter in 9 times out of 10 come down to the people. And the fact that not many of those people have spent the time to develop and invest in those who need to work with them and around them in an efficient way to make sure that they feel valued. And that's the key word I want to take away. So many of you working in HR and people and culture would have sat down and probably regularly, annually, because you're all very good at your job, review the values of your company and where they align, and making sure that they remain relevant as that personal level of innovation to ensure that your company maintains its competitive advantage. What 9 times out of 10 is not happening is that how individuals are feeling valued within the workplace is being attended to in the chase of those performance required outcomes. And the way in which I've found the easiest way to actually articulate this is just really separating conduct and performance. Conduct is the way in which we go about doing what we do, which is performance. Breaking this down very simply, performance within the workplace is our KPIs. These are what we assess and select our people on. And then the conduct is how they go about doing that. Now, for me in the military, we actually made it, again, we had to be very efficient in how effective we were. And every 3 months we had to do our performance reporting, and we literally just broke it down into, it all starts at the front. So the front end of the year, you would conduct your conversations, your command, leadership, and guidance to the team. And you would then go away and conduct that assessment of the values of the organization. And in doing so, in that discussion, ensure that others took on board what those values were. And then we would literally have people agree to, hey, these are the values of our company. These are the values that we are required to demonstrate and uphold in the conduct of our performance. And the performance, literally individually, was your job description and was your KPIs. So simple and so clear, but so many times now since leaving the military, I've gone into organizations and have actually really failed to understand that clear articulation, either through a lack of a focus on the values and more of a focus on a performance requirement, or just a lack of a view of those values as the performance requirements have changed, and just how important that interlocking relationship is. Then, and by failing to do that, you're actually failing to actually establish what is the parameters and the language and the framework and the lexicon through which you can then effectively performance manage and develop your people. And what I mean by that is, if you are able to write down an individual's clear performance outcomes and requirements, and then the values of the company, and then during your annual performance requirement or however often you do them, go into them and say, hey, look, this is how you measured against your performance requirements, your KPIs, that's clear. This is how you've actually measured against the values of which you agreed to. Right there and then, it removes any of that unknown parts of the conversation that usually get so emotive, particularly if you have been so great in actually recording your observations of people's conduct, that people should know straight away, clearly, where they sit within the organization, where they sit within their conduct and their performance. So many of us sit there and go, you know, this person is really great at what they do, but I just don't like them. There's something about them that isn't good for us. If you are not able to quantify that, okay, and the easiest way to quantify that brings it back to what the core values of the company are, you're then going to create that uncertainty. And I recently recorded a video just talking about uncertainty and all the uncertainty that comes from us personally by not understanding where we are, and uncertainty coming from how we're not truly articulating or helping others define how they need to perform in their conduct in the workplace. Then you're creating variables that people aren't able to actually quantify, and again, creating that uncertainty in the workplace. Even in doing so, and I talk about the dictation, also the highlighting the KPI performance and the values and conduct for assessing your people, using that as well as the essentially selection card for people entering into your workplace. And I revert back to my experiences in the last 2 years of my military career, whereby we were required to essentially conduct a organizational level change from the way in which we were selecting people to really introduce a heavier focus on emotional intelligence. And even in the definition of emotional intelligence, the first step is actually having other people identify how they feel valued. And I talked a lot about, you know, what your love language is. My love language is acts of service. And that is so important for individuals to understand, because throughout my career and since leaving the military, I've had the opportunity to go into roles and positions that provided me with the opportunity to essentially chase earning as much money as I could. And I did that for a bit. And while it was short-term satisfying, long-term it was unfulfilling, because I did not feel valued, because my focus came to providing, to helping myself. And that is where personally I found I sort of fell off the wagon, because I wasn't responsible for others. I wasn't putting others and their priorities at or above mine. I wasn't essentially playing to how I feel valued personally and professionally. And so important to utilize that as the first stepping stone to helping to develop and understand emotional intelligence. And I could speak particularly on how we went about quantifying emotional intelligence at the individual and organizational level. It was so fascinating. And to be honest, that 2-year project is really what helped me unlock my true potential at a baseline level to then go forward and help others to do so at an individual level, and then to grow and scale it to the organizational level. But yeah, in doing that, we then went away and actually identified individuals within our organization who demonstrated the performance and conduct standards that were at the highest levels of what we knew we needed to go and shape and take our business. And what we actually did was we analyzed them. We analyzed the commonality in their professional values and their conduct in performing their performance. We then actually went away and spoke to them to understand what additional personal values they had within them. And I want to just quickly touch on that, because another topic I'm often asked to talk about is diversity and inclusion within the workplace. And a key pet hate I actually have is diversity for diversity's sake. During my time within Special Forces, I was required to change manage the progression of opening up the selection course to women, which is absolutely fantastic. And I've worked with some of the most effective and lethal female Special Forces operators around the world. But in doing so actually has to come from a organizational level of maturity, whereby the definition of the performance outcomes match the requirements, and simply looking to select people based on any form of minority or label, race, gender, religion, sexuality, is actually potentially a systematic approach towards failure unless you have clearly defined the narrative that accompanies it and the performance and conduct requirements associated with it. Sorry, I just lost my way a little bit. This is what happens when I have a short amount of time and I get a bit carried away. Sorry, we were talking about defining individual values. And what we actually really rapidly identified was that we have these core set of values. Let's say things like teamwork, initiative, professionalism, and the pursuit of excellence. And in speaking with people, asking them how those values resonated with themselves, but then asking them what additional values they held with themselves. So straight away, we have the core group of values that we know as an organization we need to inculcate and maintain and develop to the maximum level in order to enable the appropriate level of conduct in how we achieve our performance requirements. And as we speak with those people who were some of the best in our business, and as we subsequently use this as our selection tool, interviewing people who want to come into the organization and ask them what additional values they have, we start to fill out the margins of these additional values of what people have. And as we start to look for diversity in these additional personal values, that's actually where we start to identify the potential for diversity in the conduct of the way people achieve our performance outcomes within our organization. Same as we look at the performance outcomes of that individually and then collective of the company or organizational level. And we also look back into the person's qualifications and experience, identify what their additional performance opportunities and skill sets are. We're then identifying performance opportunities within our organization as well. And there in those margins, we now have diversity opportunities over here in the conduct, in the performance of our business, and diversity over here in the personality of the individuals and the potential conduct of our organization. I'm going to leave it as that. There's a lot more I could dive into that, but even just having those conversations to start to actually provide frameworks around how you can provide a systematic approach to, what's the word I'm looking for? To diversity and inclusion within your workplace, and having that as a clear articulation document or policy or even just conversation with people helps to break down so much of that resistance in itself to such things, because I know things like culture and diversity have become such a dirty word, particularly when people are trying to do them just for the sake of doing them, through to actually provide a scalable, systematic approach. I just really want to close out and talk about, you know, my skills and experience. I've just provided with a few quick little snippets on some of the things that we do. And at the end of the day, my ultimate purpose here is to work with as many people or organizations who would like to genuinely potentially learn a different way to do things. I don't have the right way. I have one very different level of experience, and I just know that my level of experience is extremely unique. And I've spent the last 6 months working with Ross and Tim to help me understand and articulate that to help people at an individual and organizational level. So I'm definitely here to work with the team subsequent to this if you want to reach out. Be that, you know, working with yourselves to help to, you know, truly understand your own values and what makes you tick and what are your true motivators, particularly as you've now gone through this period of decluttering, the ability to refocus on what matters. And in doing so, how then grabbing that and applying that to your every action from here is an opportunity I'd love to work with, you know, some of you individually, if there are people within your organizations who need to, working with you to help identify and develop a systemic approach to developing a management and leadership capability or training capability within your organizations is, again, something I have incredible experience with, again, focusing at the individual and human level, and essentially coming down to appreciating how people feel valued, what their intrinsic motivations are, and how to build and develop the processes around to support and inculcate those. So cool. That's it from me. Again, thank you so much. I see some messages here and I'm going to go through and have a look at some of the messages that have come through and reply to them now.
I'll just actually bring them up, Heston.
Okay, let's do it.
One Kez has is, can you articulate what you mean by my love language?
Very cool. Sorry. So, and the love languages talks about 5 love languages. I'll see if I can recite them now. Acts of service, giving and receiving gifts, quality time, physical touch, and words of affirmation. And what it basically comes down to, and replace the word love and replace it with value, is how people feel valued. If you take that quick thought to think about how you personally feel valued, or how, and it's in two ways: how you show value, as in how you feel value doing things, and how you receive value, how others provide value to you externally. So for instance, my love language in giving is acts of service. I absolutely love doing things for people, but I tell you what, I cringe when people do things for me because I feel very ineffective in being efficient. And then how I feel love is actually through words of affirmation. You know, people just telling me that they value what I did for them is all I need. You know, buying me gifts, doing things like that. And again, going back to me talking previously about chasing and earning so much money, having things, beautiful things, isn't how I feel value, but having beautiful people who feel value through what I've done for them is how I feel value. And every single person within your organization will fall into one of those 5 categories. I guarantee you some might fall into another. And if no one falls in any of those categories, please reach out to me and I will come in for free and help you pull that apart and see how that person derives value. But even just understanding individually how people feel value, what their love language within your organization is, enables you to essentially establish a highway through the suburbs to be able to get straight to them and touch a part of them that fuels their intrinsic motivation and provides purpose to their everyday life.